Well, welcome to Middlesex Moments Radio Show. I'm Dr. Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College, located right here in Middletown, Connecticut. And today, the topic of our program is going to be Financial Aid 101. And in order to lead us through this, our instructor will be our illustrious Director of Financial Aid, Irene Martin. So, Irene, thanks for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Well, you know so much about financial aid, but so many people don't. And there are so many elements to it. For example, most recently, the state of Connecticut is lowering the interest rate on the Connecticut student loan pool that they use it sounds to me like it's the last loan pool that somebody would access after they've gone through federal loans and maybe parent loans, So why don't let's separate this out. This is such a huge topic. So let's just talk about loans, because the $1 trillion student debt is what has got everybody very, very concerned about student loans. So what are student loans? What are the terms?
Yes.
How do you get it?
Student loan is obviously, as it says, a loan, which means it has to be repaid. The largest loan program out there is the direct loan program, which is offered by the U.S. Department of Education. And in the event that a student is interested in taking out a loan, this would be the loan I would recommend first. Students do not have to have a credit rating check or anything like that. They just need to be a student who meets the eligibility requirements, which means they're enrolled in a degree program, they're registered for at least 6 credits, and are making satisfactory academic progress. And depending on whether you are a freshman or a sophomore will determine the amount that you may borrow. So, for example, we have students that are what we call dependent students, meaning they're at home with their parents, and they can borrow up to $5,500 in their freshman year. In their sophomore year, it's $6,500, and then if they are in their senior year at a 4-year institution, it goes up yet again. The interest rate changes every July 1st. So the new interest rate on the loans will be 4.29 starting this July 1.
And is that a decrease from last year?
That actually is a decrease from last year. This is the loan, as I said, that we would definitely recommend to students. There are other types of loan programs that go above and beyond the federal loan programs, but those they're from private lenders such as banks and other types of private lenders that are out there. But the rates are adjusted, and they could be adjusted on a fairly regular basis. The other thing with them is that they are definitely looking at the credit rating of the students. So many times younger students that are, say, for example, in the traditional age category of 18 to 22 or so, would have to have an actual credit check. And if they don't have credit established, they would have to get a cosigner. So it's a little more difficult to get, and the interest rates can be higher.
So let's talk about a little bit more about that when we come back from our break. But I want to do a little translating. So 6 credits is the usual way we think about that is 2 courses. Most courses, not all, but most are 3 credit courses. So they have to be taking at least 2 courses in a semester to be eligible. Right. So, all right, we have to take a break because the first part of the show goes by like the blink of an eye, and we will be right back. Well, we're back at Middlesex Moments Radio Show, and Irene Martin is with me today, and we're talking about financial aid, which is a topic of enduring interest to college students and to Americans, and certainly to policymakers, bankers. Everybody's interested in these the financial aid in general and student loans in particular. So I think I should back up and ask about need-based financial aid. So how do you establish need, and then do you need to establish need before you can even be able to take out a loan or to get a grant? So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Irene. Explain it to us.
Thank you. Well, to apply for financial aid, a student has to complete a form, and it's called the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, and we just refer to it as the FAFSA because that seems to be a mouthful to say. Any student who's applying has to fill out this particular form. Some other schools could require additional forms, but here at Middlesex we require the FAFSA only as the application. And we use that instrument to determine a student's need, because what happens is the information that's collected on the FAFSA goes through a needs analysis. That is a formula that has been written into law by the U.S. Department of Education and Congress. So what happens is, once the calculation is completed, it will give us what we call an estimated family contribution. And this will tell us what the family is expected to pay. We must use that family contribution. We can't change it. It's written into law. So that's how we'll use that to establish the eligibility based on the cost of attendance at the school. So let me give you an example. Let's say it costs $5,000 to go to a college, and the student's estimated family contribution is $1,000. That means that their need is the difference between the two, which is $4,000. So we would attempt to try and meet all or part of that need with financial aid. Now, financial aid consists of 3 different types of aid. We have grants, which are free gifts of money, do not have to be repaid. Loans that we talked about a little earlier, those are repaid, typically after the student has graduated, anywhere from about 6 months after graduation. And then the other is work study, which is a part-time job opportunity, either on campus or off campus in a community service position. Now, all the financial aid that we award is need-based. A student must demonstrate need in order to be eligible. The only time that they do not have to be need-based is with a student loan. Any student, regardless of need, can take out a student loan. What's different is the conditions under which they receive that loan. So a need-based loan will be called subsidized, and that means while the student is in school, the government will pay the interest during that period of time. If a student does not demonstrate need and we award them what's called an unsubsidized loan, the interest accrues immediately from the time in which the money is dispersed to the student.
And so the student is actually making small interest-only payments while they're in school?
They have the choice of either making those payments or not. If they choose not to make the payments, that's called capitalization. They can wait until after they've graduated, but interest will be accruing on the interest. So ultimately, that will be a more expensive loan to pay off in the long run. When they're all done paying off, they will pay more than if they were paying the interest while they are in school. So if one is looking to save as much money as they can and are able to pay the interest, that would be a very good recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. So how many students on average, or what percentage of our students who are on financial aid actually take out loans at Middlesex?
We don't have a lot of student loan volume at Middlesex. We probably are dealing with about a little over $500,000 to approximately 120 or 130 students per year. And I'm very proud to share that number with you, because that shows that our students don't see the need to have to borrow heavily, because we have quite a generous financial aid program here at Middlesex Community College. For students who are demonstrating financial need, we try to do a couple of things. We're trying to meet as much need as we can, and if a student is high need, our goal is to meet their direct costs. And direct costs are tuition, fees, books, and supplies. So if we're able to help a student with those things, many times that's all that they need really to get through the academic year and not have to borrow. But of course, we're always there in the event that a student does need to borrow.
So there are so many different ideas out there about how to reduce the cost of higher education. One of them that I've been reading about a lot recently is the electronic books. Because what do we estimate a student would spend on books in a year anyway, or by the semester? How do you estimate it?
Yes, well, we estimate that based on some statistics that are gathered actually by different studies that are out there. And we say that a student on average will spend about $500 to $600 a semester on books. So for an academic year, that's $1,000 to $1,200. That's when they're purchasing the books. Now, we do know that books can be expensive sometimes. So students many times do have the option of either renting a book. They can do them electronically even, where you're able to get the book online, and those tend to cost less than if you're actually buying, a bound book. Or they can rent the book. When they're renting, it's about half the price of if they bought it.
Mm-hmm. And also there's another fallback, which is most of the classes have books on reserve in the library, I think.
That's correct.
Right.
For the bigger classes, we try to do that here at Middlesex. We try to make several books available for the larger classes, such as the English 101s and such, so that if students really can't afford to buy the book, that is a resource available to them.
This cost of education is certainly a valid concern. The tuition at Middlesex, even with the increase in going into the 15-16 school year, will still be below $4,000.
It's just about $4,000,
right.
Yes, for full-time study.
And then and that includes fees as well?
Yes.
And then on top of that, maybe $1,000 to $1,200 for the books.
For the books. So the average student coming to Middlesex, if they're going to be a full-time student, is going to be spending just about $5,000 per year. And hopefully you're getting the financial aid that could certainly help meet those expenses.
And I think that's still it's a good sum of money to pay for college compared to many other alternatives, which are far more expensive. Let's say I wanted to go back to the different kinds of grants, so there are... I could explain it, but I'd probably get it wrong because I know it's complicated. So you tell us about grants.
Yeah. As I said earlier, grants are free gifts of aid, do not have to be repaid. So this is, of course, what most students want the most of, obviously. And the source of funding comes from three sources: federal government, the state of Connecticut, and the college itself. So when a student fills out the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, they're applying for any aid that's available at the college, plus the federal Pell Grant. The federal Pell Grant is the largest grant program offered by the U.S. Department of Education. This is geared toward lower income students and their families. The average Pell Grant, it's on a sliding scale. So you could go for about as little as $600 to almost $6,000 in Pell Grant eligibility in an academic year. So we consider a student for the Pell Grant first. In addition to that, we have, as I said, state aid. So we have what we call the governor's need-based scholarship. And we get an allocation from the state of Connecticut, and we award that based on a student's need. They must be Connecticut residents and have met certain need criteria. We also have the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. That is money that is allocated to the college by the federal government, and we give that to our neediest students. The last grant that we offer here at Middlesex is the Middlesex Community College Grant, and that's money that the college has set aside specifically for our students here, and we award that based on need. And I guess that's it in a nutshell.
Well, that's it's always so interesting to me because I'm always thinking, well, what else do we need to do? So let me ask, with all those grant pots of funding, and you have to match them to eligibility, do you have enough? Do we find that we have enough grant aid for all the students' needs, or do we also need scholarships that are donated by individuals who are thinking about the college or thinking about wanting to promote, students in a certain field?
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to say, money is not limitless. It is limited.
That's been my experience.
Yes. Pell Grant is always available for students who meet the eligibility criteria, but anything that we're offering that the college has controls of has a finite number. And yes, we've had years where we've absolutely we've run out of money, or we've had to sort of change our packaging for late applicants. So the important thing that I'd like to get across to our listeners is that it's very important to apply for financial aid by the deadline date. Now, here at Middlesex, we have a priority deadline date of August 1st for the fall and spring semesters, or if a student is coming for the spring semester, our deadline is December 1st. So we encourage you to get the FAFSA in 2 to 4 weeks prior to that deadline date.
Okay, so I don't know even how to get a FAFSA. So where are these? At the post office, the bank? How do I find that?
Well, the FAFSA is now all online.
Okay,
and we encourage all of our students to complete it online.
So you go to FAFSA.gov?
Yes, you go to the website. It's www.fafsa.ed.gov.
Okay. And you follow the instructions.
Correct.
All right, so we're going to take another break, and when we come back, I've got some more questions I want to ask you.
Okay.
Well, we're back at the Middlesex Moments radio show, and Irene Martin is my financial aid guru and illustrious director of financial aid here at Middlesex Community College. And we're trying to unpack the secrets of the financial world today so that more people have an understanding of the four corners of what is involved in financial aid. So many students are in financial aid at every kind of institution, the most expensive, the least expensive. And I think Middlesex is among the least expensive, but even here, 60% of our students or so are in financial aid, which means 40% are not, but 60% are. One of my questions is about how long you can be eligible for financial aid. So I myself is a college student. So if I start college and I think I want to be a doctor, and then I take my preliminary science courses, and then I get to organic chemistry, and I think I probably cannot be a doctor because I can't do this. Maybe I should be a history teacher. So I'm going to change my major. So let's say I've lost 2 years because I got to go back and take those history courses, and then I've got to go on and I want to get certified to teach. So I have to, it may take me an additional year. So how does financial aid jive with the real realities of students' decision making?
Well, in more recent years, the federal government has definitely taken a stance on limiting the amount of financial aid that a student may receive over time. In the last 2 or 3 years, the Pell Grant is now limited to 6 years of full-time study. So if a student has changed their degree, several times, once they hit the equivalent of that 6 years, they are no longer eligible for any additional funds, regardless of whether or not they have completed their bachelor's degree.
Well, Irene, is it 6 years of full-time study or 6 years of part-time study?
Full-time study.
So how would that work if I took 2 courses a semester for, what would that be, 12 semesters?
Well, then you could go for 12
semesters. You can?
Yes, you
Okay.
can. It's the equivalent of 6 years of full-time study.
Okay.
And there's also now limits on the student loans that a student can borrow. That is fairly new. There's always been aggregate limits, but now they're even limiting how much one can take within a certain period of time because they're looking to see students progress, from the freshman year to the sophomore and beyond. The other thing is, as far as the institution is concerned, we also set limits on the amount of financial aid that a student can receive. Student needs to be making what we call satisfactory academic progress. And the federal government has stated that a student must complete their program within 150% of the prescribed time for that program. So to make that a little easier for our listeners, that really means, let's say we're here at Middlesex taking an associate's degree program that earns 60 credits. The student must earn that degree within 150%, which would be 90 credits. So they're giving you some leeway to make some changes, maybe to withdraw from a class, or if a student hasn't done well, repeat the class. But it's limited. It's not limitless. Mm-hmm. So if a student is not progressing at the appropriate rate, then they can be and will be denied financial aid. So we want students to stay on task, take the courses that are part of their degree program, move on if they're planning on transferring to the 4-year school, and completing all of that within that amount of time. Because I have to say, it doesn't happen often, but we have had students that have changed their mind several times and have actually come here for an associate's, yet they've already used their money at other institutions, and that makes it very difficult for them.
If you have already earned a bachelor's degree, even if you do it in, let's say, 4 years, would you still have 2 years of eligibility for additional undergraduate study?
Once you earn your bachelor's degree, you are no longer eligible for the Pell Grant. Nor would you be eligible for the federal supplemental grant. We don't offer aid to people who already have their bachelor's degree.
Okay.
So they would have to...
They'd have to self-pay.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So as you think about the trends in the federal government's decisions about, the loan packages and the Pell Grants, what would you predict it will be like in a year or two? Do you think they'll continue to fund Pell and subsidize those student loans, or are there pressures against that?
Well, as far as I know at the moment, I don't expect to see any tremendous changes at all. I expect that the Pell Grant program will continue. There's usually a slight increase in the maximum amount each year. And the the student loan rate is really sort of relatively new. We're going to have to see how that all plays out, because we will be limiting the amount that a student can borrow more than we've ever had to do in the past.
This might be an arcane question, but when President Obama became president, he did something about the way that federal student loans were dispensed. So there must have been an intermediary agency that was actually handling the dispersal of the federal student loans. Do you remember that happening?
Well, yes, I do.
And what was that about?
Yes. Well, in years past, we would award or process student loans through banks. And it's been a few years now, but we have eliminated that middleman, the bank. And now the student borrows directly from the U.S. Department of Education. So it's now called the direct loan, okay? And by eliminating that middleman, who the taxpayer didn't have to pay subsidy to, there was a savings to the federal government in the administration of that program. So now when a student comes and sees us for a student loan, there's only one lender, one process. They'll be working with a servicer that is working with the U.S. Department of Education to do the collection on the loan, to answer any questions that the student has. So it's simplified the process.
It sounds like it was a good reform.
Yes, it was.
Right. So if a student wants to, or if of necessity can't pay at the current moment, their student loan, what happens? How do you deal with that?
If a student is having difficulty repaying their student loan, they should always call their servicer, and they're notified of who their servicer is at the time that the loan is made available to them and it's dispersed. So they may be eligible for things such as a deferment. They may be eligible for a forbearance, which is a lowered payment, based on certain criteria. There's a deferment called a hardship deferment. So if someone's having a hard time paying, they would call the servicer, and if they meet certain criteria, they could be eligible for the forbearance or, as I said, the deferment. The whole goal here is that the government, I truly believe, tries to work with the students wherever they can, because no one wants to see students going into default on their student loans. So I've always found that they've been pretty good about working with students when they're having some difficulties. The last thing you want to do is ignore the servicer, ignore the bills, because if a student is not making their payments as they should be and go into default, they lose their eligibility for future financial aid.
Very important to know.
Yes, and it also will do such things as ruin your credit.
Another very important thing to know.
Yes.
So just to get into this loan, if you're, let's say you're very young, you've just come out of high school, so you're 17, 18 years old, and somebody says, here, you should take a student loan. We explain so much of this, don't we, here at Middlesex?
We do.
Yeah.
We do. We require any student who's interested in taking out a student loan to meet with one of our professional staff before we will process the student loan, because we need to make sure that they understand what it is they're getting into. So I will show a student, what a typical repayment would look like in the future based on the amount that they're borrowing. We do what we call entrance counseling. This is required by the U.S. Department of Education, but I think we go above and beyond what that requires. And, the student makes the final decision as to whether or not that works for them. I've seen students that have changed their minds. It all depends on their particular situation.
And I think that there is a reality to being loan averse or debt averse, and one of the great things about community colleges is if, you really could work for a while, save the money and spend the money on your tuition, because it's really so affordable at $5,200 books, tuition, fees, all wrapped together. So, if people are averse to the idea of taking on debt, how long is an ordinary repayment period for a loan that one of our students might take?
10 years.
So that's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I assume you can pay it off earlier. There's got to be no penalty for that.
Yes, that is correct. You can repay with no penalty.
But then, our students are taking relatively small loans. But I think that the stories that make the press across the country are the students who take out really large amount, over $50,000 in loans. And then if you have two people who decide to marry or to, join legally, and they both have the same debt load, you've created a huge burden on that relationship going forward.
Yeah, that's correct.
That will get in the way of buying houses, cars, having children, major life decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you can understand why people are concerned about the whole student loan piece and about college affordability. But what we have here at Middlesex, first of all, is a low tuition fee structure. Books are books. I wish we could say that the books cost less here than they would at any other school, but they don't. Then the financial aid office is available to help explain how this whole process works. So if a student or a family member is interested in going to college and trying to understand how to pay for it, what would they do? Who should they contact?
Well, they should certainly contact the financial aid office or the admissions office at the school. And if they'd like to come in, make an appointment, we can certainly talk about the different types of financial aid, how to fill out the FAFSA. We are available to help students and parents complete the FAFSA if they are a little shy about getting online and answering all those questions.
Could we go through a little bit about those questions?
Sure.
So it's tax information?
Yes, it is. What they ask on a FAFSA, besides the general, name, social security, date of birth, that type of thing, they're collecting financial information from the parent for the dependent student and the student. So they're going to ask the student to report their income tax information from the year that would have just been filed. So for example, the student who is completing an application for financial aid for the 2015-2016 year, which will be starting this upcoming September, they would be using their tax information from 2014. And they will also ask information about assets. So they don't include the value of the home, that's never asked. But if there are any other sort of assets, such as rental properties, businesses, farms, CDs, stocks and bonds, those types of things, those do get reported on the FAFSA. There is something, though, that makes this process quite easy. There's something called IRS data retrieval, and if the family has filed their taxes already, they can actually just from the FAFSA go out to the IRS and then just import the data straight from their tax return. So that has made the process so much easier for our families, and they now are saying that the process was easy.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
I'm afraid we've come to the end of the program. So I've got to thank Irene Martin for coming to teach us about financial aid. Encourage people to look into financial aid at any college, certainly at Middlesex Community College, and hope that everyone in the listening audience is having a really great day. Thanks for joining us.